Many studies suggest serial killers account for only 1% of the cases that occur in the United States. But these notorious criminals leave a huge mark on culture for the repeated nature of their crimes. Fortunately, crime scene investigators have found ways to quickly identify many serial killers through studying their patterns. Especially with the help of revolutions in DNA technology, we have more tools than ever to hunt down the most dangerous criminals. Number 5. In 1929, a lumberyard worker named Hermann Allen and his family were living in Benson, North Carolina. That year, they took in a 50-year-old lodger named Handy Minson Hodges. The family got along with Hodges well at first, and Mrs. Allen bonded with Hodges through his Bible and typewriter lessons. But one night, Hermann woke up and, not seeing his wife, discovered her in bed with Hodges. The next morning, he confronted Hodges about the affair, which he admitted to. He attacked the man, cutting his life short. That day, he confessed to the crime, leading to a sentence of 20 years in prison. But after only 4 years, he was released and got remarried to a woman named Ruth Lee. But perhaps haunted by his wife's infidelity, Allen's jealousy had not faded. He grew to suspect Ruth was having an affair with a neighbor of theirs named Cap Rayner. On January 15, 1992, he confronted Rayner at his house, forcing him to come out to the porch before ending his life. But Allen wasn't done. He visited his mother-in-law and fired a weapon through the windows, killing his brother-in-law Grady. He also took revenge on Ruth for the infidelity that he suspected. This final triple murder officially classified Allen as a serial killer. Fortunately, authorities were able to capture Allen, who claimed to have been intoxicated and unable to remember the incident. He was found guilty of the killing of Grady Lee and received the death penalty. Shortly before the end of his life, he maintained that he was justified in these 3 final kills. His final words were, quote, "I'm ready to go. I do not dread it. There's a better world for me. I've had a sad life, but that's over now. I've experienced God in my soul, and I'm glad to leave this world of sin." Number 4. Vicky Don Jackson began working as a licensed vocational nurse in 1989 at the age of 33. It wasn't until late 2000 that she got a position at the Nakona General Hospital, where she would take at least 10 lives and become an infamous serial killer. Jackson's crimes slowly came to light after a significant surge in patient deaths at the hospital between December of 2000 and February of 2001. Rumors that somebody had been deliberately killing patients led the hospital administrator to alert a pharmacist about vials of Mivacron that had gone missing. Mivacron is a muscle relaxant, but it's not a controlled substance. A joint investigation by the police, FBI, and Texas Rangers revealed that over 20 patients may have been poisoned with the relaxant. Multiple lawsuits were filed by the families of elderly patients who had been injected with something unprescribed by their nurse, Vicky Don Jackson. Sure enough, syringes of Mivacron were found in Jackson's home. She was arrested in July of 2002 on charges of 4 capital murders, with prosecutors suggesting she may have turned to a life of crime after the end of multiple marriages and losing custody of her children. At one trial, an FBI agent testified against Jackson, claiming that she had admitted to taking out her anger on her patients after they were being too demanding. Jackson was sentenced to life in prison for the 10 charges, though she later released a statement saying that she still maintained her innocence. Today, Jackson stands out as an unusual case for a serial killer. Most serial killers are men, and from the outside, Jackson appeared to be a sweet, caring nurse. Much of the coverage of her case referred to her as the angel of death. Her actions seem random and shocking. For example, one of her victims was her own husband's grandfather, whose funeral she later attended. Yet Nakona residents only saw her as a nice woman who had their best interests at heart. Perhaps what's most chilling about the case of Vicky Don Jackson was her ability to cover up the true and scary desires inside of her, though they eventually became too evident to ignore. Number 3. On October 21st, 2007, an elderly couple by the names of John and Irene Bryant went missing while on a hike in the Pisgah National Forest in North Carolina. The sheriff's office began a search, learning from phone records that Irene had attempted to call 911 on the day that she disappeared. The signal had been lost. In the coming months, both John and Irene Bryant's remains would be found and identified. Irene was found covered with leaves on a trail. The wounds indicated that she had been murdered. John, on the other hand, was found the following February in Nantala National Forest. The FBI began an investigation since these homicides had occurred on federal land. But the Bryants weren't the last people to lose their lives to the killer, who became known as the National Forest Killer. He struck again in December of 2007. This time, it was at Apalachicola National Forest in Florida that he made his move. The remains of the 46-year-old Cheryl Dunlap were found by a passing hunter on December 16th. Another woman went missing on New Year's Day, the 24-year-old Meredith Emerson, who disappeared in another state park in Georgia. Multiple witnesses said that they had seen a strange old man following Emerson with his dog. It eventually became clear that the man was Gary Hilton, an infamously angry and strange 61-year-old drifter in the area. On this information, police were able to arrest Hilton, who then agreed to lead them to the location of Emerson's remains in exchange for protection from the death penalty. He pleaded guilty to Emerson's murder and was sentenced to life in prison, receiving additional life terms for his other kills. In the end, despite his earlier agreement, he was sentenced to the death penalty. In 2018, Hilton tried to appeal that sentence, but it was denied. Today, he's still on Florida's death row. Many experts suspect that Hilton is responsible for a number of other homicides from earlier in his life, including that of Judy Smith, a 51-year-old woman whose remains had similarly been found in the Pisgah National Forest back in 1997. We may never know exactly how many losses can be traced to the National Forest serial killer. Still, it's comforting to know that Hilton was eventually brought to justice and will no longer be able to continue his deadly streak. Number 2. Ryan Scott Blinston was born in 1983. Throughout his early adulthood, he ran into trouble with law enforcement, starting when he stole a Ford Explorer at the age of 22. After being convicted on a felony theft charge, he was later imprisoned for burglarizing 3 homes. But Blinston's most scary and notorious crimes didn't happen until years later. In May of 2020, Blinston was working on a landscaping team. He did some tree trimming work for an elderly couple named Lorene and Homer Severs. But only 5 days after visiting their house for the trimming, Blinston broke into their house and attacked them, ending Lorene's life but only injuring Homer. He had even scouted out their house the night before, according to evidence found from his GPS coordinates. On June 4th, not long after, Blinston struck again. This time, his victim was Sandra George, an 82-year-old woman who was also a client. He'd been doing tree trimming work on her property just that day, and had gone back into the home to attack her after the rest of his crew had left. It seemed it was the killer's MO to find his elderly victims through work. But Blinston's third and final kill happened not long after on June 6th. The victim was 56-year-old Vicky Klein, an acquaintance of Blinston. Her remains were found by a fisherman 2 weeks later in the Feather River. Klein's car had also been set on fire with an accelerant on the day of her disappearance. The police were able to match the DNA found on Blinston's car to Klein, and a search for him began. But if Blinston had it his way, he would have made a 4th kill on the very day that he was captured. The previous night, a 50-year-old man had allowed him to stay overnight at his motorhome in rural Brush Creek, California. But the man had woken up in the middle of the night to Blinston attacking him. While the man sustained injuries, he was able to lock Blinston out of the motorhome. Blinston came back with a hatchet to break in, but at the time, the SWAT team arrived and apprehended him. He received 3 life sentences for first-degree murder. Number 1. When 92-year-old Doris Gleason passed away in 2016, there was initially no reason to suspect foul play. It seemed like natural causes were to blame. But then Gleason's daughter Shannon Gleason Dion noticed her gold necklace was missing, along with other jewelry from her antique box. Suddenly, what had seemed straightforward would become a murder case. But months later, old age was still given as the cause of death. Shannon decided to continue her investigation. She retrieved 2 years' worth of police reports on the independent living complex where Gleason had spent recent years, the Tradition Prestonwood in Dallas, Texas. She encountered a surprising number of strange reports of unaccompanied deaths, including a resident whose safe had been stolen when she passed away that July. This same experience had happened many times that year, with apparently natural deaths coinciding with thefts. In November, there was one report of a suspicious person described as a black man carrying a leather satchel who had been seen multiple times visiting to supposedly check for pipe leaks. Shannon tried and failed to get in touch with newspapers about the story, but when she left a Yelp review about the poor security standards of the place, she got a call from a detective. Almost 2 years after her mother's death, she learned definitively that Doris Gleason was part of a pattern. Police had learned about a man named Billy Schemmermer from his previous armed robberies of at least 2 different elderly women in senior living facilities. He had been linked to potentially many other deaths previously thought to be explained by natural causes. Schemmermer had grown up in a family who owned several nearby senior living homes, which may have given him the experience to target the elderly. By 2019, Schemmermer had been indicted on 12 counts of capital murder, and in 2022, he was given 2 life sentences after being convicted for 2 of the murders. Now he's been accused of posing as a maintenance worker or medical professional in order to rob and kill at least 22 elderly women, with authorities still investigating other reported natural deaths that could be traced to him. While the man was able to escape attention for years by preying on vulnerable people, in the end he was identified and put where he could not hurt anyone else. With any luck, the truth will continue to come out as the investigation proceeds, and more families will get the complete truth about what happened to their loved ones. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.